Johnston, Senior Editor at CGT and RIS News, and I'm talking here today with Surabhi Pokhriyal of Colgate-Palmolive. Now, Surabhi is a member of our Executive Council, which is a forum for industry innovators who are identifying the latest technology and trends in retail and consumer goods. The group's made up of leading consumer goods, retail, and solution provider executives who are focused on sharing insights to drive action across the industry. So I'm really excited to talk with Surabhi today about some of the digital commerce trends we're seeing affecting the consumer goods and retail industries. So Surabhi, welcome. Thank you for joining me and talking with me today. Now, you're worldwide director and head of global digital commerce at Colgate, but you recently moved over from Johnson & Johnson. So I was wondering if you could just start us out by telling us a little bit about your background, including some details on how the transition's going.
Sounds good, Lisa. Thank you so much for having me. Very excited to be part of the CGT forum overall, and super excited to chat with you on all things commerce and more. So I recently joined about 6 months back, Colgate-Palmolive. I head global digital commerce for them. Career-wise, CPG is something that's all I have done for the most part in my career. Right after business school, I joined Procter & Gamble, and I was with them during the Gillette P&G transition. That's where I had my first bite of CPG. To be true, actually, Unilever was my first exposure, where I was a summer intern. So CPG is how I started during business school, went to P&G, started consulting for a long time after Procter, came to the US, and I started consulting for Reckitt Benckiser, Kimberly-Clark, PepsiCo, and a lot of other CPG players. I'd say that's where I learned my chops on all things digital and marketing and e-commerce, when back in 2010 or late 2000s, it was starting to become sexy. Before it gains the post-COVID momentum that it has gained today. And then I went back to quote unquote the client side with Johnson & Johnson Consumer, which has some iconic brands like Neutrogena, V-Note, Tylenol, and all of that. And I worked both in the marketing and CD department, heading up global e-commerce for them for close to 3 years. And very recently, I was approached by Colgate late last year, and we are starting on a giant digital transformation journey. So I got hired by their chief digital officer, and I was super inspired by the vision and the motivation that the company has to double down on all things digital, including digital commerce. And Colgate, beyond the amazing brands that we already know in oral care, personal care, also is a big name in the pet care category. And that was a new category for me. And that was one of the reasons I thought, let's go and enjoy the momentum that's Colgate building and all things digital.
No surprise to hear about the pet care. I think we all know, if you haven't gotten, anyone who's watching didn't get a pet during the pandemic, definitely know somebody who has. So we're going to talk about digital commerce, but I actually want to start us talking about data democratization, right? Because we often hear from they go hand in hand. We often hear from brands about the challenges of data democratization in the enterprise. And it's interesting you mentioned your time at Unilever. We actually recently hosted Dan Cook on a webinar, and he's the head of Walmart food sales at Unilever. And he spoke to some of the needs and challenges about ensuring those who have the data understand how to use it and interpret it. And his thinking was that ultimately everyone should have access to the data. So I'd really love to get your take on what drives success when it comes to breaking down the digital commerce silos. And what does it take so that the data can be successfully shared broadly, and so that teams can have, as Dan put it, the full puzzle instead of just pieces?
Sure. No, I love how you quote Dan on the full puzzle. Of course, data is being spoken of as the new oil in so many ways, which is partly true. But I think there's a slight difference here. Unlike oil, data is not finite. It is infinite. So every interaction we have with the consumer or otherwise, every touch point, data is being created, while oil is not being created at the same speed. So silly analogy there, but what I'm trying to say is data is being created all the time. It is up to us as brands to figure out what's the data of value, how do we get that data, and how do we synthesize and get the insights out of them, and most importantly, how do we act upon that data? Because corralling and gathering data is just one part of the puzzle. And I think that's where the overall organization, the impetus is for everybody to come to it like a team sports event, and it's not a spectator sports event where you're saying, oh, that team gathers data and insight and action. It's not that, it's all the teams. So from a digital commerce perspective, the sales and marketing teams, I would say specifically, go really hand in hand in gathering data and insights and actioning upon it. One example I would say is, if a product is out of stock and you understand from the digital shelf on Amazon, one of my hot big products is out of stock, it's a team sport event to manage by the sales team bring that information to the supply chain team, make sure the marketing teams knows, so you're not putting media behind a product that's out of stock. So you see the full funnel approach of how something simple on the digital shelf or on digital commerce brings all the teams together to act upon a data and close the loop on action.
Right. So in terms of puzzles, the newest puzzle and perhaps the newest team sport now is social commerce, right? So how is that being viewed within the industry? What are the conversations that are having about kind of figuring out the latest puzzle?
Sure. I'll take you outside the US momentarily on this, right? So China in social commerce, this is something that's being done in China and Asia for a long, long time. It's now the train is coming to the Western world, but I will say eMarketer has been quoting that China has about 10% of their overall e-commerce business coming out of social. So that's been huge there. You know, TikTok, which is Douyin there, Kuaishou, and a lot of other, platforms who double down on social commerce has been happening in China. Of late, it's being spoken more in the Western world, UK, US specifically. I view digital social commerce as an exploration channel. I don't think we as consumers, we dial into Instagram or TikTok and say, oh, let me see what I'm going to buy. That's not the purpose from a consumer. I'm browsing, out of boredom or anything, and I'm looking to be inspired. So the overall funnel of the consumer getting inspired and adding the product to the cart and checking out, the funnel is collapsing on social. So going from inspiration to putting it in your basket is the new way of, I would say, shopping that's happening on social commerce. But again, I want to clarify that in the industry, there's a myth that social commerce is a buying channel. It's not a buying channel. It's a discovery channel where buying is now made possible and you close the funnel.
Okay, so that's a great segue into my next question, talking about listening to consumers, right? So I was just talking with a company the other day, and they said that being consumer first has already almost become a buzzword, which is actually a good thing for the consumer goods industry. But really, it's translating differently for every company. In a lot of cases, it's still a lot of talk and not action. So in your experience, what's needed to propel these good intentions into action?
Sure. Going back to your question, Lisa, you had on the data piece, right? Consumer sentiment can be gathered from a variety of sources, right? First, understanding where all is consumer speaking about us. The consumer could speak to you on social, on Twitter, Facebook, and all the other channels. The consumer could also speak to you by giving you feedback, either by calling your consumer care hotline or writing to you. I don't know if people do that anymore, but leaving reviews for you. Right?
Texting maybe. Right?
Yeah, texting maybe. So if the consumer is leaving a review for you on Amazon, on Target, or Tesco, your retailer of choice, that is gold mine of information. That's true consumer sentiment above and beyond what you hear from them on the social channels. So I see many, many companies doubling down and reading that sentiment and acting upon it. The consumer might be telling you, oh, your bottle is hard to open. For folks like me, somebody who has arthritis and they cannot open an over-the-counter pill pack because the cap is hard to open. That's a solve to packaging that digital commerce team could bring and close that loop from driving from data to insights to action. So some companies are doing pretty good on it. And I get inspired looking at companies who are not just gathering sentiment from rating and review and from social chatter. They're starting to look at TikTok as a channel to drive new product innovation.
So can you give some examples? I'd love to hear, who you think is doing this well.
So I was reading somewhere, from a retail CPG perspective, Starbucks came up with new flavors based on some folks who, concocted some flavors of Starbucks on their own, and they made those regular people like micro influencers, and they actually launched flavors based on what people were putting up on TikTok. Similarly, I know Ocean Spray was a big thing, earlier, past last year during COVID, where, the cranberry and the drink became so famous and the company really doubled down and, started not just incentivizing the influencer, but doing more with what was being said.
So really taking these kind of little hits and running with them. So what do you think is holding the companies, what's holding them back?
I think a lot of the times it is inertia, because organizations would rather do what is working well and double down on the energy of it. But more evolved organizations are getting conscious that we just don't need to do things well that we already do, right? There are two parts of it: doing things differently and doing different things. So the part that we are talking is more in the realm of doing different things. So doing things differently is also, that's an iterative approach, right? Your current project can give you 2x, 3x, 5x ROI. You keep improving, but sometimes you just need to define new projects. And that's where, the big hairy monster of inertia comes in. And that's not easy to break down, because there is always hesitation, right? Is this right for us? Is this right for us now? Should we wait and watch? And, companies that are leaders, versus companies that can be fast followers, act differently.
So kind of on that note, what are some of the biggest misconceptions about consumer goods and digital commerce that you're seeing right now? I'm going to imagine many of these are coming from those legacy companies that might, be holding back.
I would say it's not as true today as it was pre-COVID. So I'll just, COVID has really changed the perception of digital commerce and the misperception around it. But pre-COVID, I used to at least hear many questions around, so what's the incrementality of this business? Why should we spend here, more money and more time? And what's the net new that we get out of it? I think folks are now starting to realize that digital commerce and all things digital do not only help you on the channel of commerce. So if I'm spending more money and more might behind Amazon, Walmart, Target, Tesco, my own B2C channels, I'm not just benefiting on the channel. There is a whole halo effect of benefits that I get in my brick and mortar and my traditional channels as well. So we have started to call this concept to be digitally influenced sales. So you are showing up in the best of how you can as a brand online, and the consumer is choosing to consummate the purchase or make the purchase offline. So all those, tying the, dots together is happening now. And I think people are getting more open and more knowledgeable of the fact that this is not just a channel specific conversation anymore. It's a sales plus marketing, full funnel, pan channel kind of conversation.
That is a great note, because it brings me to my last question. You posted a great photo on LinkedIn recently. I'm sure anyone who's connected with you will know what I'm talking about. But you showed a photo of a Casper display in your local Costco. And I think you called Casper the poster child of digitally native brands born online. It seemed very accurate. And you pointed out the Casper packaging, which was calling out something, it said something around 40,000 reviews on Google and Amazon. And it's sitting in a brick and mortar Costco. And you pointed to it as, the ultimate example of truly omni digital influence sales, with the social proof coming from frenemy Amazon, which I love. So how is this type of selling really forcing brands to think differently? And, where else are you seeing this type of true omni-channel retailing?
Sure. Thanks for calling that out, Lisa. I think that spurred a lot of conversation within the company and outside as well. But I think as consumers, we see so much when you start walking the halls of stores, right? It's the oldest thing in the book that all of us did as CPG practitioners. I highly encourage all the teams and everybody I know that we do more of these walks, not just on the brick and mortar world, but also walk the aisle, the digital aisle, just to get comfortable with how your products show and how competition shares. I see many products and companies doing this. If you look at that cooler brand Yeti, YETI, and I saw the other day there was a product placed on Walmart, and the sticker on the product, the cooler, which is an expensive cooler, said 5-star reviews and X number thousands of reviews and so on. And I think the insight comes from the fact that brands have realized that when I'm walking the Target aisle and I see a new product or a product that I seek validation for, I open up my phone and read reviews on Amazon or any other retailer, usually Amazon, right? And that becomes social proof. So companies are trying to break that friction between me having to take out my phone. If you give me that information right there on the package or on the shelf, then you are breaking that friction and creating social proof and helping me, close the purchase quickly. So I'm super inspired by an insight that has been in plain sight and so obvious, and all of us as consumers usually have practiced it, but brands have started seeing and doing it. Of course, digitally native brand are more nimble to pivot and do this quickly, but a lot of major brands are also starting to do this.
It's interesting you bring up Yeti. We just recently did a story in them, and they're doing some really innovative other things. With augmented reality, where they're having consumers be able to use their phones to picture the Yeti cooler in their trunk before they buy it. So I think they're a great example.
Wayfair does some cool stuff on that as well, I know. And it makes sense for the furniture, kind of industry, like with the old shortage of desks we had through COVID. Can people picture that school desk they're buying for their 12-year-old? Will it fit the room and how will it look and all of that? But I think some, augmented reality, which has been spoken so much, is really fit for some cool purposes.
It might be finally finding its moment, as they say. Well, thank you so much for talking with me. We're out of time. I really appreciate you taking the time. Just a reminder, anyone who's watching, if you have any thoughts or questions, feel free to reach out, and be on the lookout for more videos from our executive council. Thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank you, Lisa.